10. Let me read those for you. And the topic for today is love and its relationship to law. And there are many different ideas regarding that, but we'll make our way through this text and seek to understand what the scriptures say. Paul writes, "Owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law." So, Paul has just spoken about our relationship to the civil authority, to the government, and how we should regard our relationship to that authority. It's not something which is a necessary evil in the world, or something which arises out of a human compact, an agreement, a social contract, these kinds of notions that flourish in the world today. Rather, the civil authority is appointed by God and accountable to God. And therefore, as one accountable to God, the civil authority should exercise his rule and authority in a manner which reflects God's dominion, reflects God's law. So we can work through that at another time in terms of the civil application of God's law. Just briefly, I would say the Ten Commandments, as they're expounded upon in the case laws of the Old Testament, form the foundation for a new covenant, New Testament civil authority and the role of a government. So we see that as the core and central idea for governing authorities. It should respect the worship of God and preserve God's worship in their culture and society, and also the relations of people to each other need to be safeguarded. So the family needs to be protected. The lives of the innocent should be preserved. Marriage should be supported and protected. People's personal property needs to be protected, and so forth. So these are ways in which the civil authority exercises their proper authority within the world today. Now, they break that down in a wide variety of ways. And certainly we can quibble about the ways in which our civil authority reflects that or fails to reflect these standards. However, Paul, living in pagan Rome, urged Christians to support, or at least to obey and honor those who are in authority. He ends up the text in Romans 13, verse 7, by speaking of what we owe the civil authority. Pay to all what is owed to them. And then within the context of the governing authority, the civil authority, you owe them taxes, you owe them revenues, you should give them respect and honor. These are different ways in which we pay our debts to society. We pay our fair share, to use the language that's current today. So that's where Paul ends that section on our duty to the civil authority, and you can look at a previous video if you missed out on that, and I posted that online. You can follow it there. But today we're looking at verses 8 through 10. Let me read those verses. I already read them, didn't I? So let's go through this section here and develop Paul's concept of love. An interesting choice of topics after the role of the civil authority. Those seem to be two very contradictory ideas. The civil authority as being one that maintains justice. It's blind justice. It just metes out punishments appropriate to the crimes And so we don't look to the governing authority typically for love. But Paul, after speaking about governments, does speak next about love. And that reminds us that, in fact, the civil authority ought to be acting in love for those over whom he governs. He should love the innocent. He should love the righteous. He should defend them, seek their flourishing. And so it's a very subtle way in which Paul reminds those who occupy positions of authority that they need to act in ways which communicate love for those under their care. And I'm afraid too often today we have people more interested in power and authority rather than in actually caring for their people. They may profess to care, particularly for the poor, the oppressed, the needy, and so forth, and shower them with words to the effect that they are the champion of the poor and they're come to help them, that sort of thing. But in truth, that may simply be a subterfuge for their advance on power and their interest in obtaining power. I've been reading a book by Audible, so I'm listening to it, not actually reading it, but a book, I think it's called Red Harvest, and it talks about the nation of Ukraine and how it tried to form itself as a nation and faced all kinds of tensions from the Germans, the Austrians. This is around the turn of the 20th century, early 1900s. And then the Russians as well. Even the Polish were all tugging at the land of Ukraine, and the people of Ukraine at different points trying to assert their independence. Well, this is the time that you recall the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, that communism come into play, and you have Lenin and Stalin and people like this coming in and saying they are the ones for the working class. They want the dictatorship of the proletariat. They're hostile to the bourgeoisie, to the capitalists who seek to oppress the working man. And so they put themselves forward as the working man's champion. And yet this book will demonstrate that Russia, through the foolishness of their decisions, brought famine on Russia itself and on Ukraine. And they felt that the Ukrainian peasants, the peasant class who did not really want to give up their property, were clinging to the property, and they were a problem. And so the Russians put tremendous pressure on them, would not feed them, would confiscate whatever grain they had and send it back to Russia. And the intelligentsia in Ukraine, those who advocated for a Ukrainian history, culture, language, and these kinds of things, he tried to destroy them and take them out. So the civil authority should love his people and not do them harm. And too often it comes down to a desire for power at any cost. So Paul speaks of love after considering the subject of the civil authority and speaks in general terms. Owe no one anything. That's a very important principle for our own financial position and economics, place in life. Be very careful about taking on debt. It's not to say that there's no place for debt. There are occasions and times when debt is necessary. In the Old Testament, you can find examples of where believers had to take on some debts, and there were laws about not taking advantage of the poor when they needed to borrow from those who were wealthy. For example, in Leviticus 19, verse 13, we read, "You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning." That doesn't really get to idea here, other than the fact that don't owe your workers anything when they fulfill their responsibilities. Don't hold back their pay. Pay them regularly, and so because they depend on that to feed their families and so forth. So whether it's the employer not owing anything to his employees, being careful to pay them according to the contract, or individuals having a tough time with their finances, we should be very careful about owing any money. Of course, today especially, you get a credit card debt, and you're talking 20-some% interest on that typically. It's an impossible situation to get out of debt. The only reason why you would have credit card debt is if you're confident you can pay it off without having to incur financing charges. So be very careful about that. It's one thing to go into debt for the purchase of a home or a car. These are extraordinary expenses, and you shouldn't be too concerned about that. But going into debt for other things can be a trap. So be very careful about that. Owe no one anything. It's a fundamental element to Christian prosperity, except, Paul says, to love each other, or literally the Greek is to love the other. And the question becomes, is Paul's instruction here designed for those within the community of faith, those who are within the Church of Christ, and you should love the other within that community, within the life of the church, or does that include loving your neighbor as yourself? And so that includes those who are not believers, those who are not a part of the church, but those outside in the community. And of course, God's law is pretty clear that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves, and it goes beyond just simply the community of God's people. Act in loving ways to your neighbors who are around you and seek their welfare, their well-being. But certainly, there should especially be a concern and interest for those who are within the church, who are among the people of God, making sure that we take care of each other's needs. So we are to love each other. Now, is this a kind of debt that we owe others? Am I obligated to love others? And I would say, on the one hand, yes, love is a debt. It is an obligation. We are commanded to love our neighbor. It's not a suggestion, but rather it's a command. So clearly in the scriptural narrative, there's not a conflict between the command and the response of love. You say, well, love needs to be self-generated. Love needs to have feelings behind it, and an affection, a desire for it. You can't just command love and expect people to do that. But the scriptures are of a different mind on that. Yes, we should have a desire to help others around us and engage in that help however we may. But it's commanded of us, and sometimes what you find is that I may not feel like helping somebody out at this particular time, but as I do the work that God commands me to do in loving those within my home, those within my church, those within the community, as I actually engage in that, I find that the feelings follow along with that, and I begin to have more of an interest in the other person. So there's a call to discipline, I think, and a concern to honor God by keeping his commands and loving each other. Hopefully, your love for those within the church is something that's very easily comes to you, and you delight in God's people, and you want to minister to them and take care of them. So that's a mark of the regenerate heart. You have a love for God and for his people, for those who are united to Christ. So, owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. So here Paul brings up the whole topic of the definition of love and how it relates to law. And Paul finds that the two work together in the way of fulfillment of the law. It doesn't simply say that love obeys the law or honors the law, but it fulfills the law. It carries out what the law expects. And so love is the positive outworking of the expectations of God's law. The law comes to us in negative forms, chiefly when you think of the Ten Commandments, and Paul is going to talk about that in a moment. It comes in a rather negative form: you shall not do this or that. And that's where at times we feel that there's this antithetical relationship between law on the one hand and love. Love is more positive, it's outgoing, it's generous, it's kind, it's good. Why are we talking about do not commit murder, do not commit adultery, and so forth in the context of this idea of love? Aren't they two different things? And within the broader Christian community, there is a sense that the Ten Commandments and the law of God was something that was unique to Israel under the Old Covenant. And so that law, with the dissolution of the Old Covenant period of time, passes away, and we have a new ethic, the ethic of love, whereby we do unto others what we would have others do to us. We love each other as we love ourselves. And so there's this new ethic of love that governs the life of the Christian. And it's not that cold, heartless, rugged obedience to law that you have under the Old Covenant. And so some think there's quite a contrast there, and they're not engaged in the same sorts of things. Paul, it seems, has a different view of that. When he roots love into law, he shows, first of all, that the law continues to abide with us into this present age. If love truly is the outworking of law, if it is the fulfillment of the law, it's the positive aspect of the law carried out in life, then clearly the law continues into this present age. And so the Ten Commandments continue to have validity, an abiding validity within the life of the church and within the life of culture as well. And so Paul says, the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. He meets the expectations that the law demands. So we get then to a definition of love, and it's not merely a feeling for someone else or something that we decide for ourselves is a good thing to do. That quite often what you find is that in many Christian circles, you have a kind of autonomous view of love. It's what I determine is the right thing to do. And so I might try to bless it and sanctify it by saying, what would Jesus do? And then I speculate for a bit as to what I think Jesus would do. And then I work from that and act in loving ways. And certainly the example of Jesus is foundational to Christian living, and we should look to Jesus for guidance as to how we should love one another. But at the same time, this love is more than a kind of autonomous direction for life where we think we know what the good thing is to do and do it. That kind of love has been a cause for all kinds of actual wickedness, in the sense that I might say that if I'm in a marriage relationship and I find that the relationship no longer is a relationship of love, but we've just gone our separate ways. We've grown apart, and there's no love there at all. It's a loveless marriage. And so if I have an opportunity to enter into a truly loving relationship, then why not divorce that partner and go to the next and seek that loving relationship there? Now, the law would say you're not to commit adultery, so you are to be faithful to your spouse throughout your life. And if there is a lack of love within the relationship, well, then you need to work on that and restore that flame of love that you once had when you formed the marriage. But you see, we sometimes get carried away with what we feel is the loving thing to do, and that gets us into trouble. It can come into view in parenting, where we feel like our child needs to be coddled and protected and preserved, or what have you, from this and that, and we shelter them too much so that they're not exposed to the kinds of things around them in the world, and therefore they are really not prepared to face things in life. And maybe what we've done is not provide proper care for that child as the child grows up. But in any case, there is a loving thing that we need to do, and sometimes we don't properly understand what God's word expects of us. So if we root love in the law of God, then we have guidance for how this love is to operate. The law provides the fence for the field in which love can operate and function. It can grow. You get beyond that fence, you break down that fence and open up the borders, then all kinds of things happen, and true love collapses. And people are moved in all kinds of different directions accordingly. So, love fulfills the law. It's rooted in the law. It is the positive affirmation of the law, and it works in ways which satisfy God's expectations of us. Now, one of the great things of being within the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, or generally Presbyterian and Reformed denomination, is that in our larger and shorter catechisms, we have an exposition of the law of God. And one of the things that you'll find as you read through that exposition of God's law is that it not only talks about what things the command forbids, but also positively what the command entails, what positively we should be doing. So if the commandment is you shall not commit murder, well, that not only means that I shouldn't foster hate within my heart, or even go so far as to hit my neighbor over the head, to kill him, but more positively, I should care for my neighbor's life, do those things which enhance life, protect that neighbor, and make sure he has everything that he needs. And similarly for myself, I should defend my life, and I should do the things that are important for my health throughout my days. So there are positive things that the law implies, and the catechisms help us to think through that and see how robust and thorough God's law is in its application to life. And so verse 9, Paul goes into the commandments. He says, you shall not commit murder. Now, notice he's referring to the Ten Commandments. It's very obvious that he has the Ten Commandments in mind. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He clearly has the Ten Commandments in mind, and in particular, the second table of the law, as it's often described, those laws which have to do with our relationships with each other. And interestingly, he quotes from the Septuagint version of the Ten Commandments, which has the order reversed a little bit, beginning with adultery and then going to murder and theft of property, which I found rather interesting to come across. I think the Septuagint translation in Deuteronomy 5 is what Paul has in mind here. The order is not particularly, I think, essential one way or the other, but it is interesting that there's that use of the Septuagint, a translation of the law of God, and Paul considers that translation, even if it is perhaps in a different order than what you have in Exodus 20, nonetheless the translation is valid. You shall not commit adultery. Obviously, the commandment here safeguards the marriage relationship, and so negatively we should admonish, forbid, keep from breaking that marital relationship, that marital bond in an immoral way, either through engaging in marital relations prior to the actual formal relationship, premarital sex, or through having a relationship outside the marriage while the marriage is ongoing. That would be the ordinary form of adultery. But the command also considers other things, other ways in which sexual relations are disturbed, disrupted. Homosexuality is a violation of the command for adultery. The command has regard to monogamous marriage between a man and a woman. That is marriage. Any kinds of sex outside of that kind of relationship is forbidden. And so the command negatively has a wide range of applications. And positively, it urges us to do those things which support a marriage, encourages a marriage couple to maintain their relationship with each other, and encourages us within our marriages to be faithful and to be caring for our partner, and make sure that that love relationship remains vital and strong. So you shall not commit adultery. Next, you shall not murder. And here the translation properly is murder and not just simply kill, which you have in the King James Version. You shall not kill, particularly thinking of Exodus chapter 20. I didn't read the King James on this text here. But murder is the taking of an innocent life. It doesn't have to do with the taking of a guilty life, one that is subject to capital punishment. We spoke last time of the authority of the civil magistrate to actually execute criminal conduct. So that would be consistent with the commandment, you shall not commit murder, because it's the punishing of those who do commit murder, and thereby protecting those who are innocent from further attacks by a murderer. So you shall not commit murder. Negatively, we find the command is given in a negative form, and it reaches the outermost limits of that command with regard to murder itself, whether it's in the form of genocide, aggressive acts of war, crime on the streets, or what have you. The command forbids these kinds of things, but you can step back from the edge and go to the heart of things and see that the issues of the heart, the hatred, animosity, enmity, strife, these kinds of things need to be resolved, because they also are a breaking of that law. Jesus made that clear in his Sermon on the Mount. And then you can go to the positive side of not committing murder, do what you can to promote life and advance people's lives. So there's that command. You shall not steal. I've been interested in this in view of the reading that I've done in the rise of Marxism and its influence in our culture today, and the hostility towards private property that increases. There have been regulations by the Biden administration whereby someone who owns a property and rents it out cannot collect that rent or kick out a renter from their apartment. If they're unable to pay their rent, they can stay there in spite of the fact that they can't pay. So what do you think people are going to do? They're going to stay without paying. You have squatters' rights, I think, in different cities, major cities, where somebody can sit in somebody's home that's unoccupied, and then you can't get them out of there without a major legal battle. It's not their property, but nonetheless they have use of it and access to it and a right to it, according to the government. This is dissolving the whole concept of personal property and property rights. And this kind of thing is ongoing. You've got the redistribution of wealth, paying your fair share. Yes, pay your fair share. There's no question about that. It's interesting, there was a conversation with Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, about his taxes just the other day. And he said he's happy to have paid his, I don't know, $5 million, whatever it is, in taxes for this year, probably even higher than that. Some obscene amount of money, but he's wealthy enough that it's not a big deal. He's happy to pay his taxes, he says. Well, some of the reporters came back to him and said, well, are you paying your fair share? And, the government really needs a lot of money. What are you doing to help out with that? Are you paying above what is expected of you? And he wouldn't answer that. Of course not. And so these Marxists and these big government types are those that talk a good line, but they're not really interested in carrying that out when it affects them. So
Come on, guys.
property rights and the threat of the redistribution of wealth is something that we need to be concerned about today. There are a variety of other ways in which that is taking place as well. So when you go back into history, in the history of the Marxist revolution in Ukraine and Russia, both of them were Marxists for the most part. Both of them were looking for the dictatorship of the proletariat, in effect, and the redistribution of wealth, the ownership of property by the proletariat. So that was kind of the common theme of the time. And again, they destroyed the right to personal private property, and consequently they destroyed businesses and farmers and people who knew what they were doing with a farm and had a motive or incentive for building their businesses. They destroyed that, and then wonder of wonders, they didn't have enough food to feed their own people because they had, and Ukraine is the really, it could be the breadbasket for the world. It's got some of the greatest farmland that you could ever imagine or hope for, and yet they couldn't feed their own people because they were not following through on this command to observe the law. So private property is an important element to the Christian ethic, and it's part of love. You have to respect somebody else's property and not take it off of them through government redistribution plans or what have you. So you shall not steal, you shall not covet. It's interesting that he brings up coveting here, because stealing, murder, adultery, these are outward physical acts, things that we do one way or another. Coveting is that which is within the heart. It's the desire, the unbridled desire for something, whether it's property, somebody else's husband or wife, or what have you. This kind of coveting sums up the commandments that Paul highlights here. So that's all part of the loving aspect of having our hearts subject to God's will. So all these commandments are summed up positively in the Old Testament by this command: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And so what we find here, that's from Leviticus verse 19, verse 18. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And note the context of that statement. It's bearing a grudge against the sons of your own people. That's that inner activity of the heart. And Moses says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So God says through Moses. And so the law of God affects our inner attitudes and feelings about things. And the proper response to God's law is to love our neighbor positively, to care for his well-being, and not to entertain ways in which we can do away with our neighbor. So finally, love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. This is one of the great things about the Christian ethic. It positively brings good, blessing, and benefit to others around us. And that's the value of what love does. It doesn't do wrong to somebody. It helps them out. True, proper love. And that is the fulfilling of the law. I was reading briefly in Carl Henry's Christian Personal Ethics is the title of his book. I have it here, actually. And he talks about different forms of ethics, and he contrasts the Christian ethic from secular ethics. And they could be idealistic ethics with ideas of duty and moral responsibility on the one hand. So that's the idealistic ethics. And then there are naturalistic ethics, where people operate on the basis of the fact that we're all animals, basically, and we operate according to what we want. And he contrasts the Christian view with this non-Christian pagan viewpoint, which works on two levels: a level of transcendence, the level of rationality, and then the level of immanence, or the irrationality, where every man does what's right in his own eyes. And Christianity is founded in God's revelation. Christian ethics are founded in God's revealed will. And so that takes care of the rationality of ethics, because they're revealed by God and we can know and understand them. And also the immanence of ethics, how they affect us in our daily living and various ethical decisions that we need to make. We take the law of God and apply it to life, and we do so by the help of the Holy Spirit, and he guides us in that sort of ethical life. So it's a great blessing for us to have the revealed will of God and the counsel that it gives to us as to how we should then live, to borrow Francis Schaeffer's language. How should we then live? Well, live a life of love. And as I mentioned last time, with regard to our duty to the government, the governing authority, we should pray for them, submit to their lawful demands, show them honor and respect. And in these ways, we can influence change within the government so that they protect the church, protect God's people, consider them to be worthwhile people within the life of the government, and can be an asset to a nation rather than a threat. Of course, if you have an evil government, sometimes they may view that Christian life as a threat to them. But if we're praying for them, if we're submitting to their lawful authority and showing them honor and respect, that will temper that kind of hostility that they have towards us. Similarly, love and the expression of love will help to bring about a greater measure of peace within our culture and society, within the church, and certainly build each other up and help us to grow in Christ. So I'll finish there, and I'll turn this live stream service off.